issue of sustainable development really means for the people in the Caribbean three things: taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impact, conserve and sustainably using the ocean, seas, and marine resources available for sustainable development. We need to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystem, sustainably manage forests, combat and halt and reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. Our panel this afternoon is Mr. Romano. Mr. Romano is the manager of the EMA, General Manager of Technical Services. He is a geologist by training with over 30 years experience. Our other panelists is Dr. Nesha Beharry-Borg, National Coordinator, UNDP. She is the National Coordinator for the Global Environment Facility Small Grant Program at the United Nations. And we also have Mr. Nikolai Edwards, who will be chairing as well this event. We have please forgive me, we have Ms. Xiomara Chin, also of the EMA. Thank you very much. Now in 1990, Herman Daly, one of the early pioneers of the ecological sustainability, proposed one: for renewable resources, the rate of harvest should not exceed the rate of regeneration sustainable yield. With respect to pollution, the rate of waste generation from projects should not exceed the assimilative capacity of the environment. And for non-renewable resources, the depletion of non-renewable resources should require comparable development of renewable substitutes for that resource. Now, before I continue on and on, I wish to turn you over to the panel who will take this discussion further in discussing all what is environmental sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Patton, or Mrs. Patton, Coryat-Patton. I am Hayden Romano from the Environmental Management Authority. What I will do is to build a picture and focusing on Trinidad and Tobago and trying to use some other examples from the Caribbean. And I will start telling you a little bit about the EMA, and then we'll move into the focus, which is climate change, oceans, and terrestrial ecosystems. The EMA has been established since June of 1995, which makes us 20 years old this year. And like so many other environmental institutions, I mean, the EMA came out of that Rio 1992 summit. And the Rio 1992 summit, which would have been now 23 years ago, the focus was sustainable development. And the EM Act speaks to sustainable development. We at the EMA, we are not an environmental protection agency. We're an environmental management authority. And our focus really is to bring environmental issues into development planning. And maybe it is good foresight by our present government to have included the EMA under the Ministry of Planning and Development. In 2006, we would have completed our second national environmental policy, which really is supposed to drive environmental issues throughout Trinidad and Tobago. And today, in 2015, we are at present updating this 2006 policy. Because the 2006 policy, I mean, issues like climate change were not present at all. And therefore, what we need to do is to be including issues like climate change into the policy. The issue of climate change is global. I mean, we even have the Vatican in the person of the Holy Father speaking to climate change. President Obama speaking to climate change. What are the issues and challenges for our region? Vulnerability with respect to temperature increases, changes in precipitation and sea level rise. We have a lot of the islands going through what we would call drought conditions. And maybe we now start to look at opportunities with respect to reusing water. And one of the things that I will talk about a little later on is a project that we have been, a Jeff Crew funded project in terms of wastewater that we have done in Trinidad and Tobago. But I think one of the things that we need to start thinking differently about is how do we reuse resources, including water. Of course, we in Trinidad, like a lot of the other islands, are small island development state. And we in Trinidad, although we contribute less than 1% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, with respect to total emissions, we are ranked number 2 in the world after Qatar with respect to per capita emissions. And therefore, it's something that we need to look at as small island development states. Sometimes the measures, I mean, per capita, really is not a useful measure for a small island like Trinidad, contributing less than 1% of greenhouse gases. And however, Trinidad and Tobago, we do have the highest per capita of emissions in the Caribbean region. We, in terms of the action that Trinidad and Tobago has taken, our intended nationally determined contributions, or INDCs, are based on a carbon reduction strategy developed for power generation, transportation, and the industrial sectors, which is the main sectors that contribute to our carbon emissions. This is consistent with our national climate change policy, and we are in the process of developing a carbon reduction strategy, which involves wider stakeholder consultation and participation through a climate change focal point network. And this network comprises over 175 representatives from government organizations, private sector, and civil societies. So I think other than a number of the other islands in the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago challenge is the challenge of being an energy economy. So there are a lot of benefits to being an energy economy, but there's also a lot of challenges, including what they call it, the subsidy, the energy subsidy for oil and gas in Trinidad. So that is one of the big challenges for Trinidad with respect to reduction in emissions from the transportation sector. The EMA is now in the process of closing out an IDB funded project on the strengthening of the institutional capacity of the EMA with respect to climate change. We expect this project is going to be completed before the end of the year, and there were two components to this project. One was the legislative framework with respect to climate change, because the EM Act, when it was completed in 1995, did not include anything to do with climate change. And therefore, what we need to do is to include climate change in the EM Act. And the other component of the project was the strengthening of the actual institutional capacity of the EMA. And one of the things that we see coming out of this project is the actual establishment of a climate change unit within the EMA. Goal number 14, if we move on to goal number 14 of the Sustainable Development Goals, is to conserve and sustainably use the ocean, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. What are some of the issues and challenges? Of course, we need to improve food security throughout the Caribbean. We have we have a number of fishers and fish farmers, and we also have illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. We have a lot of outdated legislation. We have weak governance. And we have weak also monitoring, control, and surveillance systems. Our people throughout the Caribbean and our economies are dependent on coastal ecosystems. These ecosystems, of course, include coral reefs, mangroves, beaches, tourism industry. And of course, these ecosystems are all under threat from overfishing, pollution, coastal developments, and other human pressures. Roughly 75% of our reefs are considered threatened, and a quarter of our mangrove ecosystems have been lost since 1980. And many of these activities that damage our coastal ecosystems arise from poorly informed decisions that fail to take long-term ecosystem values and the full range of benefits from coastal ecosystem services into account. There's a lack of information at the present state of these resources to inform sound management decisions. And I think, you know, one of the opportunities that we have throughout the Caribbean, really, we need to have the scientific basis for making decisions. For too long, we are making decisions without science. And I think, our universities are now, well-developed, mature institutions that have to play a major role with respect to informing scientific decisions in this region. Decisions cannot be made by whim and fancy and because we think, oh, it might. There must be a scientific basis for all our decisions. So what are some of the things that we are doing in Trinidad and Tobago with respect to the conservation and sustainable use of our oceans? As I was telling you, the Jeff Crew Regional Wastewater Management Project, where we were looking at the resource valuation studies for wastewater management in Trinidad and Tobago. So there were two projects, one in Trinidad and Tobago and one in Panama. In Tobago, the project focused on the Store Bay region, that's Southwest Tobago region. And in Trinidad, the focus was the Chaguanas region. Again, valuation studies generally use cost-benefit analysis. Cost-benefit analysis needs data. And where we had good overall data in Trinidad, like population data, meteorological data, for the whole of Trinidad and the whole of Tobago, data specific to regions was lacking. And therefore, what the consultants, who in this case was World Resources Institute, WRI, had to do was to actually develop their own methodology. And this methodology they called a multi-criteria analysis. And the multi-criteria analysis utilized stakeholders to come up with a criteria to make a decision of where, the wastewater treatment plant should be built. This information is going to be available very soon on the Jeff Crew website. We expect that either this month or next month, the final reports will be completed. And it's very good information, not only to use for Trinidad, but for the rest of the Caribbean with respect to what is a good method when you don't have data available. And valuation studies, especially ecosystem valuation, is something new throughout the world. The other project that we have to look to, which is almost being completed, is the Pro Ecosystem project. And that project, you can go to the Pro Ecosystem website, where again, it's how do you account for ecosystem services? Until we start accounting for ecosystem services, until we put a value to ecosystem services, they're not going to be important. Because when you look at the national budgets of all these islands, I mean, what is the value of your coral reefs? What is the value of your forests? What is the value of your mangroves? What is the value of your beaches? And they must be valuable. What is the value of your water? Until we put hard figures, those services, we are not going to get the attention that is required on the environment. Of course, we will also be aware of Regional Fisheries Mechanism, or the CRFM. The Sub-Regional Management Plan for Flying Fish in the Eastern Caribbean was the first regional fisheries management plan endorsed by the Ministerial Council in 2014. CRFM member states have demonstrated their commitment towards collaborating in the sustainable use, management, and conservation of the spiny lobster through signature of the 2015 St. George's Declaration on Conservation, Management, and Sustainable Use of the Caribbean spiny lobster. The government of Montserrat is embarking on a coastal and marine preservation project to develop and codify a sustainable ocean policy for the island, including zoning, example sanctuaries, tourism, fishing and other types of zones, and fisheries laws and regulations. And of course, we know how important this is in Montserrat, which in 2015 really is still in recovery mode. I mean, from that volcanic eruption in what year was that? I can't remember. And if you look at Goal 15, which is to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystem, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse the land degradation and halt biodiversity loss. Of course, biodiversity is a cross-cutting issue for all dimensions of human well-being. This goal is closely linked to all of the other sustainable development goals. And if it is not achieved, it will negatively impact on all of these goals. What are some of the issues and challenges? In many cases, in many of our islands, we regard our diversity as unlimited to be used at will. Again, we lack information on the present state of these resources to inform the decision-making process. We have no idea of the extent to which biodiversity contributes to the national economy and employment. We are unable to estimate the cost to the nation of biodiversity destruction until it is reflected in national disasters such as flooding, hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, all of which we have in the Caribbean. And of course, we have widespread illegal activities which contributes to the sharp drop in animal and plant populations. In Trinidad and Tobago, and this started again through a green funded EME project, which we are doing right now with the University of the West Indies. In 2014, we commenced for the first time national wildlife surveys. And these surveys for us have been very successful because it has finally started to provide some information to inform how we deal with game species. So fortunately, the survey started at the time with a hunting moratorium. So we were able to do surveys in the wet and dry season of 2014, and we're just completing the wet season 2015 surveys. The EMA has also, been able to designate environmentally sensitive areas and environmentally sensitive species within the EM Act. And we have, and there are also various policies that have been developed in Trinidad, including the National Protected Areas Policies 2011, the National Forestry Policy 2011. And we're also in the process of realignment of the National Action Program to the United Nations Convention on Combating Desertification, that's the UNCCD 10-year strategy, and the development of the fifth report to the UNCCD. We also have commenced the preparation of the fifth report to the Convention on Biodiversity, and we are also in the process of revising the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. I'm not sure how time is going, but I think I should start to close and so we can have some discussion. I think this webinar is very timely, and you know, as I read your I don't know what you call it, disruptive thinking, bold action, and practical outcomes. I mean, you know, these words are so powerful, and it's so very useful, especially for young people, because I think in the Caribbean at this point in time, we do need disruptive thinking, we do need bold action, and we do need practical outcomes. And these outcomes must involve all the stakeholders. And stakeholder consultations are never easy things. I mean, it's always very, very challenging things. But we have to do it because we have to get buy-in right at all levels. Buy-in cannot only be at the top, and it cannot be a top-down approach. It must be also bottom-up. Of course, this webinar is so timely. I mean, because I mean the UN last week was discussing or approving the Sustainable Development Goals. Our issues and challenges in this region continue to increase. And you know, sometimes we have to be careful with that, because when we looked at what was happening in the 80s and 90s, and before that, when, you know, the prophets and doom and gloom was telling us, you know, that the overpopulation will take over the world, and the population will be over 20 billion in 2015, and we haven't even reached anywhere near that. When we look at what happened in terms of DDT and what the results are telling us now with respect to DDT, and we had people like Rachel Carson telling us, you know, Silent Spring, which all was very good in terms of driving an environmental movement, but it wasn't science. Today, what we need is science. We need real science. We need strong science. I think the IPCC, I mean, the climate change, I mean, is attempting to do the right thing with respect to science. Let the science drive decisions. And I think I will stop by saying that we need good science. And we need good science, and we need good science to come from our universities and our institutions. So I thank you for this opportunity, and I will, I mean, instead of going on, I will.
So thank you very much, Mr. Romano.
Thank
very
you.
thought-provoking. So he spoke about the issue of strengthening the capacity within the EMA. He spoke about the energy economy, the challenges that it can pose, as well as the benefits. But one of them looking at the issue of subsidy and reducing the emission. He also spoke about the ecosystem, the scientific basis in making decisions, and of course the involvement of the University of the West Indies. So thank you very much. I will now ask Ms. Xiomara Chin, our research coordinator of the EMA, coordinating the strategy and research unit, to make a presentation. Please.
I just have a few remarks, and it's probably to add to what Mr. Romano said in his presentation. And listening to his presentation, one of the common threads throughout that in terms of the challenges in meeting the three goals really is the lack of data to inform our decision making. So what are the potential or the possible options to address this? That is definitely a challenge for us, not just here in Trinidad and Tobago, but as a region, because more and more I see that we have duplication of effort in terms of these types of studies that we do. And there are limited resources in all of the countries. So we need to work together and to collaborate more closely in terms of the studies that we do to inform the decision making. And another key thing that we need to address in trying to meet these SDG goals would be, how do we communicate the science and how do we communicate the data that we get from these studies to our decision makers? Most times, I think we're all speaking different languages. The policymakers speak their language, scientists speak a different one. We need to come up with a common language that everybody can understand and agree on. And those, I think, are probably what I see as some of the main challenges in meeting any of our sustainable development goals now.
Thank you very much. And again, I like the thought of the common thread that you spoke about, that running throughout this entire topic, the duplication of efforts. And one of the main things you find that the scientists, they speak. You have the technocrats, they speak. They have a certain language. But is it a language that we all can understand? And I think that is one of the challenges that we have to try and overcome. Without going further and rambling, I would like to now introduce Dr. Nesha Beharry-Borg, GEF SGA National Coordinator of UNDP. Please.
Thank you, Ms. Patton. Thank you, Mr. Romano and Ms. Chin, for your comment. Lots of thought-provoking questions that I have for you and comments, but I mean, especially coming from GEF SGP and hearing about the national policy issues that you all are working on, which I think is extremely important. And as we know, in all countries, it takes a while to work through these issues, that they're very complicated processes. The immediate comments and thoughts that come to mind is, how can we, while these national policy issues are being worked on, have practical action around the SDGs? And what can we do in our household and in our communities to actually implement the SDGs? Because as you know, we need to be able to monitor the performance on our SDGs and then report on it. You mentioned the importance, Mr. Romano, about integrating the research that comes from the university, and perhaps Ms. Patton, you're well placed to answer this question, but I really think that we need to make concerted efforts into how do we translate the research and how do we mainstream the research into practical action and into our policy decision. You know, scientists, they tend, of course, like all of us, tend to work in silos, but we really need to find a way in order to translate some of these actions. We also spoke about the use of valuation systems, and while this is not necessarily a new thing, it's been talked about for quite a while now. I think we need to think about how can we expedite the use of it, because through ProEcoServes, through the GEF eCrew project, we're seeing again and again that we need to be able to use these kinds of methods in order to help make decisions. But we really need to make this clear to policymakers. This is a discussion that has been going on for quite a while. So I think we need to sort of press the fast track button and think, how can we actually make this useful in our policy decisions? The ProEcoServe project has done a brilliant job in terms of mainstreaming the use of valuation systems, but again, we need to continue doing more. The other thoughts that I have, especially sitting and working with civil society, is that I think we need to do quite a lot in terms of engaging civil society stakeholders on the SDG. I mean, certainly we're doing this in some way through this webinar, but what do these SDGs mean, and how can communities and households, level persons actually engage in action? They are the ones who have to be our watchdogs and have to help us, you know, pull us back in line when we're not actually achieving these SDGs as quickly or as efficiently as we'd like to. So I think there needs to be a discussion with civil society members as to how it is we can, in Trinidad and Tobago, localize and contextualize the implementation of SDGs. And I think that's it. I will stop here. Is there any comments or questions?
Thank you very much. So what I'm hearing throughout from this panel, we are looking at about making responsible decisions, taking positive action to preserve the environment in which we live. And as Dr. Borg said, that yes, several NGOs, civil groups, government, they're all working to maintain some sort of environmental or ecological balances, for example, recycling drives. So again, without further ado, let's open up for discussions and for any questions.
So at the moment, we're having online questions. I don't know if Mr. Romano would like to. I don't know if Mr. Romano would like to first address the questions or comments that were posed by the panel. Yeah, and then we can go to the next question.
What can we do immediately? And what we can do immediately is really individuals, and each of us deciding that we're going to make a difference. We're going to make a difference by, starting to recycle. EME has a project right now in Trinidad, recycling, the iCare project. And I don't know how many of you actually recycle. I know it was, Plastic Heap did a good job in the west of Trinidad, and people in the west of Trinidad recycle. But for the rest of Trinidad, we did not recycle, except for newspapers. I recycled newspapers. So today now, I'm trying to convince my family, that, plastic bottles have to go in one bag, glass bottles have to go in one bag, paper in one bag. And, it's a culture change, and it's not easier. And all of us have to make the decision that we're going to start doing it. And once we make the decision, then we could go to Dr. Borg's house or Mrs. Patton's house and say, hey, you need to recycle. I'm recycling, so you can recycle. And I think those are some of the decisions that we have to make and force other people to make. Valuations. Valuations are being done. We have a lot of work to do with them, and I'm hoping that we'll have people at the university that's going to continue working with valuations. But the only time valuations are going to be recognized, and this is valuations and accounting for ecosystem services, is when we get it into national budget, when it becomes an accounting line in the national budget. And not a lot, a couple of countries in the developed world are working on it, and now there's a whole textbook on I can't remember the guy's name, on valuation of ecosystem services. Sorry that I don't have the name, but it's out of the whole ProEcoServe project. I think our country, said to the United Nations, that they were one of the countries in Trinidad and Tobago that wanted to be involved in terms of accounting for ecosystem services. So it is happening. It is not happening quickly enough, and it cannot happen quickly enough until the language changes. And Xiomara is so right, because politicians think in 5-year terms and in votes. Technocrats thinking, wow, which line of the budget can I get this item from? And scientists and university people think of what paper I can get from this, because I need to publish. And how do we get those three groups together? To make a decision that is going to be, valuable to Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean, that is going to be result in sustainability. That is the challenge. And I think that's all of our challenge, because we all live in these islands and we all want to continue living in these islands. So we want the best for the islands. And what is the language? What is the correct speak to ensure that we all get involved and we all make decisions that is going to result in sustainable development. I couldn't remember the other question.
So we do have a couple questions from our online participants. They have not been directed to anyone in particular on the panel, but I can read them and perhaps pick one. So for the first one is, are there any steps taken to start communicating, with politicians regarding scientific-based governance? And what do you think is the best way to not only reach them, but also that the politicians take action? Would you like me to read 3 questions and then?
I don't know which one you prefer. Read 3 questions, so
One question.
Oh, we can ask.
one at a time.
One at a time.
I think one at a time. Yeah, one at a time. Steps to communicate with politicians, and let us be clear that we elect the politicians. 1. 2. The politicians are just like us, live here. The only difference is that we have put them in a position to do something that for some reason, I mean, whether it's the way we like their manifesto, we like something about them. So we have put them there. So therefore, we communicate with them. We communicate with them daily. They listen to the radio, they read the newspapers, they know everything that's going on. I think the real issue is, how do we get environmental issues to the forefront? There's so many other competing issues. I mean, and I think that's the challenge. I mean, why do we want a moratorium on hunting when you have no information, no data to say that species are threatened? I mean, today we could say we have some information. Maybe it's not sufficient information, but we have some information, and because of the moratorium on hunting, we have the information. So we could give that information to the politicians for them to decide on how we're going to manage these species and to speak with their various communities. But that's an easy one. How do you stop people from fishing because you think there is overfishing? Unless you get and this is why the data, I mean, is so critical. If I was a politician, I mean, my whole community is a fishing community, and you want them to stop fishing or to limit fishing, which is people's livelihoods. What's the alternative you're given? So I think we also have to put ourselves in each other's shoes before we start judging. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mr. Romano. Okay, so steps to communicate with politicians. I agree, it's probably the most difficult and challenging task that we have. But I think every project that you engage in, any use of national funds or even international funds, there should be a component where you're able to mainstream the results of your project. And mainstreaming means not just producing a booklet that will be tossed away perhaps or only read by those persons who are interested in the topic, but also getting in front of policymakers. And hopefully that message that you're trying to share will get up to the politicians. I think that's one way of providing them with concrete information that they can make decisions with. I think also, for example, the SDGs. We have to make our politicians and our policymakers more aware, because they are being bombarded with information constantly, and and huge priorities that in such a way that the environment may fall to the bottom of the priority list. But we need to find strategic, creative ways to engage them in as to why it is we need to try to achieve these SDGs. So we need to think of different ways. I don't have the answers in terms of what these ways are, but we need to be really creative in engaging them. We also, as I think civil society in Trinidad and Tobago needs to have more of a place on the table where governments and politicians are concerned. And they need to be equipped in order to have these dialogues at the level of politicians or policymakers. I think that so there needs to be a lot of investment in equipping our civil society. Because again, as I said, they are our watchdogs, and they are one of the persons who one sector of society that keeps us in line in making sure that we actually implement the policies that we've signed up to nationally and locally. Mr. Romano made a really good point with respect to, a politician having control over a fishing community. And so I think when we think of the environment, we also have to think of how can we protect the environment and engage people in sustainable livelihoods. So it can't be protection and conservation is our line that we're following, but how can we integrate the community and the same members in those constituencies to benefit from protection of the environment? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if Ms. Chin wants to comment or we can
move on.
Okay. So, second question. In order to achieve sustainable development and reduce environmental degradation, one major step is to create and maintain sustainable homes. What measures are in place to achieve sustainable homes in the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago in particular?
I don't have to start, right? Sustainable homes. And when we look at sustainability, overall sustainability in terms of homes, I mean, we can look at building materials. What building materials are we using? I mean, with respect to constructing homes. We can look at what are we using to power our homes. In Trinidad and Tobago, again, because of this energy economy, lighting, air condition, and the use of electricity, I mean, is I don't want to say free, I mean, because we do pay for it, but it's so affordable that see nobody thinking about solar panels. Whereas when you look in Barbados, where it's a completely different story, you see people having, solar panels all around. In Jamaica, solar panels all around, because, I mean, there is a need for it. So there's a challenge in Trinidad with respect to energy. The one is water. What are we doing in our homes in terms of reuse of water? Because water is becoming a scarce resource, and therefore I think we have to look at how we use water. So building a sustainable home really is going to be a culture shift, because most of us, when we build a home, I mean, we've been in a home for 50 years, 50, 60 years. I mean, they have homes in Trinidad older than that. But the sustainability of the homes, I mean, what about things like gardens? I mean, how many people still have kitchen gardens or home gardens in terms of food security and getting involved in food security? Or once upon a time, people had chickens in their yards or ducks in their yards and turkeys for Christmas. I mean, becoming this is not Trinidad alone, I think. I mean, a lot of the Caribbean becoming as our standards of living increase, maybe sustainability becomes more of a challenge. And I think it's something that we all have to think about. But that's an interesting concept, sustainable homes. I mean, because it comes back to what Dr. Borg was saying in terms of households. How do you take it down? How do you take sustainability down to the household level? It's an interesting challenge again for all of us because it will not be easy. It means that it involves work for all of us.
But I'd like to add something here with sustainable homes because unless you make that paradigm shift, culture shift, it's not going to happen. In other countries, you have where if you do not recycle, you're charged. So therefore, if you do not separate your garbage, your refuse into different categories, and you put it there for the garbage collector, you are charged. So therefore, it is one way that the policymakers can look at something. How do we make that drastic change to becoming a sustainable society with respect to environmentally friendly and stuff like that? Another issue here there is Dr. Borg had asked earlier on about the University of the West Indies. There's a very vibrant research program at the University of the West Indies. And I know one of the researchers, in fact, the whole theme is advancing knowledge, impacting life. So it's not simply doing research for the purpose of, okay, publishing, or you have done a research as stuff as case may be, but how your research can be translated into impacting life. And one of the research that is, I know, currently taking place is something called rainwater filtration. So the use of rainwater as a way of utilizing rather than wasting water, looking at water to produce the water, looking at the whole issue of rainwater filtration or fertilization, I believe is the phrase that they use.
I think that's an important point, Ms. Patton, because you touched on something really important there, which is that sustainable homes are always going to be a nice to have unless we have economic incentives to force us essentially to be able to build sustainable homes. And if we don't, if we don't, then it will never really be done because people, unless you're an environmentalist or unless you're really committed, you're not going to have the incentive in order to spend additional money. So I think that's really an issue that has to be taken up nationally for us to create those incentive mechanisms. And then beyond that, you can actually have practical actions, things like, as you say, reusing your water, not using your hose to wash down your perfectly clean yard, trying to use better irrigation systems for gardening. So you can actually do things right away. But it's certainly an area in Trinidad and Tobago that we need to, again, advance on.
I actually think our grandparents probably practice more sustainable home building than we do. And when you look at the houses that were constructed 40, 50, 60 years ago, they had high ceilings. Their windows and doors were designed, they were positioned so that you had good airflow or you, in terms of the direction of the sun, etc. But now we've transitioned to these concrete and glass and steel homes and buildings. You look at the yards, they're all paved. You're not going to see anything green in many of the yards. So we don't practice rainwater harvesting as well. We don't use permeable pavements, etc. So I think it could be that we need to relook at how we used to build houses and homes and buildings. And I mean, now we call it green architecture, or we call it low impact development housing. But it was something that we practiced, many would consider way back when, before many of the generation were born. But I mean, there are things that we can bring back from what our grandparents and parents used.
I think we have just about 5 minutes, so maybe we can take one more question. So we have one more question, sorry. Many recycling projects have been launched at the school and community level. and we face problems with pollution of recycle collection sites and unreliable pickup services. How can the EMA help?
Yeah. And the EMA's eye care project is really the precursor of the recycling authority. The recycling authority, which the legislation started off, it came in very late in the last parliament. It went through the lower house, it didn't get to the upper house. So the recycling authority is what it's supposed to take up in terms of recycling, and recycling right through Trinidad and Tobago. The EMA at this time with the iCare project is going to start recycling. And we've started. It's so fantastic, because you don't realize how much people want to recycle. Trinidadians want to recycle, so people are recycling. And we're fortunate that we have the swim call material recovery facility in DevCo compound, and that is up and running. And the plastics are going there to be sorted and compressed. And at this time, they will be exporting the recycled plastics. They have the other recycling companies that we're hoping to work closely with in terms of them accepting whether it's paper. Well, all the glass will go to Carib Glass Works, and then you have those other companies. The question is not how the EME can help as much as how can the community, the whole of Trinidad and Tobago help. The whole of Trinidad and Tobago can help by, you cannot recycle stuff that has been in the environment, plastics that have been in the environment for 10 or 15 years. You can't clean it up to recycle it. It's just not cost effective. So what we would like is for people to start practicing recycling. If you have a bottle of water, and it's in your car, leave it in your car, take off the cover, put it in a bag, and start collecting your recyclables. Similarly with your glass bottles, but you need to wash them out first. Wash them out, put them in a bag. Similarly with your newspapers, keep them together and drop them off at the various depots. One of the big challenges that we face is that, there are signs on the bins to say what you need to put in the bins, and people still put in garbage. There are people, the regional corporations are still collecting garbage. You don't need to put your household garbage in our bins. So what we need is, what the EMA needs on this project is really assistance from the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to ensure that there's a culture change and that they will make the commitment to recycle and to recycle properly. Xiomara.
Recycling. I think you're right that people many people in Trinidad and Tobago do want to recycle. I can think of particularly university students who have studied abroad. They get accustomed to having to recycle while they're abroad, whether in US, Canada, Europe, and they've come back home. They have no recycling program, and it's a culture shock in that way as well. But so I think we have a large portion of the population that is really ready to recycle. But again, part of it is that we do need to put the proper legislation, the proper systems in place. Once we collect all of the different products, your plastics, particularly your plastics, your cans, etc., do we have the proper systems in place to, are we going to recycle them locally? Are we shipping them out, etc.? Those things do need to be addressed. And that has to be addressed, I think, at a national level.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We do have a few more questions online, and we have an online forum where questions will be transferred, and it will be open for 1 week following this webinar, and all speakers will be available to respond to these questions. So rest assured, all questions will be answered as best as possible. So I want to say thank you very much to our speakers, Mr. Hayden Romano, Ms. Xiomara Chen, Dr. Nesha Beharry-Borg, also to our chairperson for today, Mrs. Deborah Coryat-Patton, and to all of our participants, both online and offline. It was indeed a very productive session, very thought-provoking. I think we learned a lot. Please look out for next month's webinar. It will be on youth and the environment, and we'll highlight the importance of youth engagement in preserving our natural resources. Remember to follow all of our discussions on our Facebook page at Caribbean Future Forum. You can follow us on Twitter at forum_Caribbean, or log into our website at CaribbeanFutureForum.com to follow these discussions. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Thank you.